Okay, I've got a man on now. I value his time, his efforts, his heroism in so many different ways. He was the former editor of Forbes magazine. He was editor of the economic desk for all of Asia for Forbes magazine. At one point, he was offered a position as finance minister of Japan. He's originally Canadian. He now lives in Japan. He is, how can I say, he's got the dragon by the tail, as we should say, and many of you have probably heard of him. I became a huge fan of this gentleman after Kerry Cassidy's Project Camelot YouTube videos of him talking about his involvement fighting the international global conspiracy, the banksters, the global criminals that run the world, and recently some fantastic developments which have validated so much of what my guest has talked about in a lawsuit that was filed in the Southern District of New York by Neil F. Keenan, individually and as an agent for the Dragon family and citizens of foreign states, versus all kinds of people, the United Nations, the Italian government, the former president of Italy. And so let me just bring him up here because I know he's only got about an hour or so. My guest this evening is on this last night, actually, for us of 2011, moving into 2012, my guest, Benjamin Fulford. Benjamin, how are you today, sir?
Fine.
So tell me, you've had some, and let me just give you my theory on this. Many years ago, I thought that North and South Korea would eventually come together peacefully. And after the secession of the death of Kim Jong-il, and we'll talk about that because you believe that Kim Jong-il was murdered. I believe his eldest son was exiled because he snuck out of North Korea and tried to visit Disneyland in Tokyo, I believe. And Kim Jong-un, who was a kind of a prep school kid from Swiss finishing schools. He's a huge fan of American basketball, specifically Michael Jordan of all things. The third son of Kim Jong-il is now being touted as being the next leader of North Korea. And I pointed out to my audience a number of times that the only three nations left on Earth that do not have central banks controlled by the Red Shield Rothschilds are North Korea, Cuba, and Iran. But you think that situation's about ready to change, yes?
Yes, I do. But it's a mysterious country. But I've been out in this part of the world, as you know, since 1980.
Yes.
And, my views about North Korea have evolved a lot based on meeting actual North Koreans and other types. But one of my biggest awakenings came when I met a very senior Chinese government agent who told me essentially that they viewed North Korea as an American colony.
Huh.
And at first I thought, what? But then I realized, actually, it makes perfect sense. You got to remember, America's controlled by, the large corporations, especially these days, the Carlyle Group, the military-industrial complex, the big military companies, and also the drug-dealing part of the CIA, right?
Yes.
And there are a lot of incidents that have happened that confirm this. The biggest one, of course, is the fact that they got all their missiles from missile technology from Pakistan's ISI intelligence service, who in turn got it from the Americans. So what's going on here is that they were using them as a bad guy, as a boogeyman to sell weapons. So they'd give them a tape-o-don, they'd tell them to shoot it over Japan, and then they'd show up in Japan with Richard Armitage and all these other guys saying, oh, you got to buy these Patriot missiles. They're really expensive, but they're really good at stopping tape-o-dons, and they also gave them their nuclear bomb. And this is the sort of thing that you have to go back and you realize that, the whole Soviet Union, Cold War, communist threat was a fake show designed to sell weapons after World War II ended.
Right, yes.
And that government was installed by these people who were, above the Soviet Union and the West when they were staging the Cold War. And we're talking about people like David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger and senior Russian leaders. They were all in on it.
Okay.
So now what's happened is it's hard to make clear what's going on, but there are two basic factions fighting in the Korean Peninsula. The old military-industrial guys want to keep the Korean Peninsula split because it allows them to sell weapons and manufacture crises. Also, North Korea is a major manufacturing center for amphetamines sold throughout Asia. That's their favorite drug for people here. A lot of gangsters, truck drivers, housewives, whatever. It's a very big industry.
Right.
And it's controlled by the CIA and North Korea, When I say the CIA, I mean the director of operations part of it, the George Bush part of it, okay? Not those people in Langley who are patriots. It's two CIAs,
Yes.
The Gestapo and the old OSS. Anyway, so what I was told by Japanese right-wing groups connected to these various Asian secret societies is that a big move took place in North Korea. And there's been a fundamental power shift in the Korean Peninsula. And the Rothschilds are apparently involved. And you got to remember, there's a split between the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. They're all related,
Right.
But it's just like the royal families had their cousins in Russia killed with the Communist Revolution. They fight amongst each other.
Right.
But anyway, my understanding is that, first of all, Kim Jong-il never really had that much power. He was the face for a collective leadership. And the story I heard is he was killed by a Swedish prostitute a couple years ago. With a medicine that causes stroke.
Right.
And there is evidence that, for example, the Kim Jong-il who appeared after those reports was, 2 inches taller.
A puppet, a double, somebody put in place.
And what happened now is that the double was killed. There were two doubles, and they ran out of doubles.
Right.
So they decided to go ahead and announce the new regime anyway. And the story I got from a member of the Rothschild family in relation to this is that they're going to unify North and South Korea under Northern control. They would have an emperor, sort of like in Japan, who would be a symbol, and then they'd have a political system similar to that of South Korea. They'd mix the two systems. And then they'd turn North Korea into a major manufacturing hub and modernize the place. And yes, there would be a Rothschild central bank. Now, the Chinese have agreed as long as the American troops are taken out of the peninsula.
Right.
And we'll know more if this is going to happen or not when, there was a President Roh who wanted to unify and was making very friendly gestures to North Korea, and he was assassinated. He was thrown off a cliff. And now the President Lee is basically taking orders from the Rockefellers and those people. And so the question is, who they elect as president in 2012 in South Korea. And if it's what they would label in your propaganda media as a leftist type, it would be a very good sign that the process of unification would begin.
Okay.
But it wouldn't happen right away because the standard of living is so different. They'd have to first modernize North Korea before, linking up.
Well, which would be at a cost of billions of dollars to the South Koreans, which, of course, would drive them into debt, and they'd have to borrow money, and they'd be in the same position as West Germany was when they actually had to when the wall came down in '89, and they had to then assimilate East Germany, right?
Yeah, but every Asian country that's developed and modernized, with this kind of mix of communism and capitalism they use out here, has experienced a big economic boom. So it would be they would be investing money, but probably it wouldn't turn into debt because they'd be making profits. They would be actually building factories and doing stuff in the real world. And you got to remember this. There's two types of finance. One is just parasitical, And that's the problem you're having with your central bank in the United States and in Europe. And the other is constructive, where they actually, build stuff and make things happen. And they build schools and hospitals and roads and develop the country.
Yes.
So, it doesn't have to, debt does not have to be evil as long as the bank shares both the profit and the loss. But in any case, that's what I've heard, and we'll see what happens. And there were a lot of people arrested in Japan together with the move against, a move in North Korea. And the other thing people don't realize out in the West is that Japan itself has been largely run by North Korean agents since the end of World War II.
Uh-huh.
And the story is this. You know how the Japanese would fight to the last man, and when they ran out of bullets, they charged with their swords and all be mowed down?
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
Well, this is true. They would fight to the death. But then the Americans would come in, and they'd find all these guys who are still alive. And they say, hey, why didn't you fight to the death? They say, well, I'm a Korean. This isn't my war. And so they said, we can use these guys to run Japan after we conquer it. And so they took a bunch of Koreans, and they gave them Japanese names and citizenships, and they used them as proxies. People like Nakasone, who was prime minister in the Reagan era. And they also used minority peoples here in Japan, who also control the Yakuza.
Right.
And then they use a taboo of the emperor to hide all this. The Showa emperor was actually a real power. Okay, he actually really did have power, and he guarded Japanese independence, and he was close to David Rockefeller. Okay, but the emperor we have now is obviously not the same caliber, and he's become a proxy for Kissinger and Bush and these gangsters, Right. And that's one of the problems we've been facing here in Japan. The Chinese are growing 10% a year because they basically copied the Japanese model, which they used up until 1985. The Japanese economy has actually not grown at all since 1992. For the past 24 or 5 years, because the Americans forced them to imitate that Wall Street-based system they had, and it didn't work. It helped enrich a bunch of foreign thugs, but, it didn't do anything for the Japanese people. It
right.
just made them... but what the Japanese had was an economic planning agency that would kind of figure out, what do we want as a people, how do we want to be 5 years from now? What do you want to do in the next 5 years as a whole? They'd make a big plan. They'd talk to people. They'd get information, and people say, we want more roads, we want more sewers, we want more schools, we want more hospitals, we want more community centers, whatever it is. And they'd go and they'd make a big plan to build it all, and then private enterprise would do the actual work. And this resulted in fast economic growth and the lowest difference between the rich and the poor in any industrialized country. It was a good system. The Americans used military strength to force them, and threats to force them to dismantle it, because they were afraid of Japan becoming too strong and too rich and too powerful.
Yeah, I guess that's what happened back in the 80s. I mean, most of the system was set up, as I understood it, by Douglas MacArthur when he went in and basically set up the entire system.
Yeah, young people who weren't around watching the news in the 80s forget that in those days, everybody thought that Japan was going to take over the world, and that the Americans would be using yen in a few years, and it seems like a distant memory now, but there was a time when that was considered the biggest possible future. And it was only through shooting down the Japan Airlines Flight 123 and killing 500 and some people and other threats that they forced the Japanese to sign the Plaza Accords and start the process of, dismantling their economic model and handing over the keys to these thugs at the Federal Reserve Board.
Right. Well, shifting gears for just a second, Benjamin, because the last time, thank you for giving your last television appearance in English for us here. Actually, what we're going to talk about is your claim that there are nuclear bombs being buried in fissures off the coast of Japan to take out Tokyo and Osaka, and threats against Las Palmas Island, against the East Coast. Benjamin, in your last missive, and actually we have a couple of things to talk about because I seem to be one of the few people that has actually read all 114 pages of the Keenan lawsuit in regards to the seizure of what are known as the Chiasso instruments from Dragon family representatives Yamaguchi and Watanabe in Italy. And apparently these bonds, these U.S. Treasury bonds totaling $134.5 billion, are still in the possession of the Italian government. You were also saying that in your last, I guess, television show podcast, that your life was being threatened by a number of these people in these major groups, and that nuclear weapons were being buried in fissures. There's a huge fault line right off the coast of Japan. The top part of the fault line ruptured famously with a 9.0 earthquake on March 11th of this last year, causing between $15,000 and $20,000. And hold on, let me complete my thought. On the other side of this, there is an island in the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa, which is called Las Palmas, and there is a volcano on that island that, should this volcano blow, half the island would go into the ocean, which would then create a 300-foot tidal wave, which for all intents and purposes would wipe out the eastern coast of the United States. About 5 years ago, the Pentagon and the the United States military were having serious conversations about sinking this island a piece at a time, about blowing it up. You may or may not know that in the last 3 weeks or so, there have been a series of very worrisome, thousands, if you will, of very small earthquakes all around this volcano on the island of Las Palmas. Interestingly enough, meaning the hand of God, and the hand of God would literally push the oceans to wipe out the East Coast. And as I said, the military's been talking about sinking the island, and now we're seeing all these vibrations around this island, which could possibly threaten the eastern coast of the United States. Your claim is that there may be nuclear weapons being buried in these fissures to possibly take out Tokyo and or Japan, should Japan continue on a certain course of action, that being to force the Red Shield global elite to start spending some of their money for the betterment of mankind to help change the future that we seem to be hurtling toward.
Yeah. Okay. Now, first of all, I want to just briefly summarize the evidence that the tsunami and nuclear crisis in Japan were manufactured by people connected to J. Rockefeller.
Okay.
The Federal Reserve Board. We have the Japanese security police recorded a conversation between Deputy Secretary of State of the U.S. And the Japanese power broker by the name of Ichiro Ozawa, in which Ozawa, this took place on March 9th, he was offered the rights to zeolite in Fukushima Prefecture if he allowed if he didn't cause the government to fall apart, because he was threatening to take his people to the government. And zeolite is used to clean up radioactivity. This took place on March 9th. I got contacted by the daughter of a major gangster who said she had to meet me on March 10th. And she set my alarm on my phone to ring at 11 o'clock on March 11th. That's maybe a coincidence. But the more damning one is that on March 10th, the price of Higashi Nihon House, a company that makes discount housing in northern Japan, their stock price rose 40% on one day. This is the day before the tsunami, okay? And then finally, more recently, and this is something you guys, if you want to check out, you might be able to find a way to get this person and talk to him. But Pastor Izumi Pole of the Tachikawa Church in Tokyo had sheltered a member from the Japanese Self-Defense Forces who said he was part of a 15-man team that was placing nuclear weapons on the seabed off the coast of northeastern Japan. And they didn't know what it was going to be used for. They thought it was some kind of experiment. And after the tsunami was set off, 14 of these 15 people were killed. And he's been sheltered by Christian groups. And he's now believed to be in Los Angeles. I've told this to the U.S. government and the CIA. I said, get this guy's evidence, but obviously they don't want to. The other thing is that there's a Japanese deep-sea drilling ship known as the Chikyu Maru. And it was, there are local news articles showing that they were drilling holes into the seabed right off the shore of Japan, right at the epicenter of the earthquakes, before March 11th, like starting in January. So you have a lot of evidence pointing. And then the other one is there's an Israeli company by the name of Magma SC that was in charge of security at the Fukushima nuclear plant. And we also have reports of Benjamin Netanyahu phoning the Japanese prime minister and threatening to set off nuclear crises all over Japan if he didn't basically hand over the money, type of thing. And this has also been recorded.
Well, Benjamin, you were saying this. I heard you say this.
All right. Anyway, the
back in January.
The Chikyu Maru is now off the coast of Chiba. And it's doing something. Chiba's just off the Tokyo.
Yes.
And it's doing something. And I think it's being stopped. But the story I heard from my CIA sources that Obama ordered an attack on Tokyo. And this was to threaten, to try to force the Japanese government to capitulate and allow the Rockefeller gangsters to remain in control of the global financial system. And they were trying to use this threat of mass murder to do this. And some unknown agency has also, I got contacts through emails and other places saying that they would take revenge on an attack on Tokyo by sinking that island, Las Palmas, and causing a tsunami on the U.S. coast. So clearly, we have some very dangerous people with some very powerful weapons making threats that is not a nice thing, a desirable situation. Because, and the problem is that the people who took over control of your financial system are religious fanatics. And they are sure that it's their destiny and it's the destiny of the universe that they're going to rule the world from Jerusalem and that they're going to kill 4 or 5 billion people in an Armageddon and then they're going to rule the rest of humanity as their slaves. This is crazy stuff, but they really believe it and they're really trying to accomplish it. Now, I've received an email from a guy called Vincenzo Mazzaro, who's a cavalier in the Teutonic Knights, a senior member of the P2 Freemason Fascist Lodge, saying that if I didn't come to Switzerland and negotiate, that they were going to start World War III in Iran. And sure enough, you see, they've been screaming and barking about Iran and Israel for God knows how long, but they're still trying to sort of play this World War III card. It's insane stuff.
Well, are you going to go to Switzerland and stop World War III?
Look, this guy tried to kill me last time I went there. I said, you come to Japan and we'll guarantee your safety and we can talk. But I'm not going to Switzerland because I don't trust you. This guy was also found outside the house of a colleague of ours in Switzerland, in Geneva, carrying a gun and a sophisticated lock-picking device. He's a mafia hitman of some sort.
You need some better friends, Benjamin.
Well, these aren't friends. These are people who I got involved in because I asked a simple question about why don't the Japanese use their money to end poverty. And the reason was because it's being stolen by some extraordinarily high-level gangsters.
Right.
World-level gangsters. And so, it's not like I voluntarily, wanted to hang around with these gangsters and murderers. It's just that I had no choice.
Right. On that note, again, the Keenan lawsuit, which we talked about the last time that you were on, specifically about these instruments, do you? After reading through this, I just wasn't sure. I think Neil Keenan's heart is in the right place, but the fact that he filed this in the Southern District of New York, and that he's trying to sue ambassadors, which have diplomatic immunity, the United Nations and the Secretary General of the United Nations, who also have diplomatic immunity, that he's trying to sue Silvio Berlusconi and the Italian government. Isn't this? It just seems like it's the wrong jurisdiction and the wrong place for it. as I understand it, if he was to do this, he would have had to have actually sued in The Hague through the International Court of Claims. Yeah, and you got to put up $100,000 to be able to do that, and all this other stuff. So, do you think that the lawsuit in New York is a waste of time?
Well, I mean, I will find out. What he told me is that a lot of people in the Pentagon were going to use this as their vehicle for a legal change.
Okay.
And he is apparently, negotiating with this Rothschild to try to come up with a solution. But the point about that lawsuit going to the Southern District of New York is that The Hague is controlled by the Rothschilds.
Yes.
And so you wouldn't get a fair trial there. And the other thing is that the reason these particular individuals are named is because there's forensic evidence linking them to an actual theft of a physical bond.
Right.
Right? It's not an abstract case of, you're ahead of a secret group that wants to start a new world order.
Right, yeah, it's not an abstract case at all. It's basically Yamaguchi and Watanabe had this $134.5 billion bond. They got stopped on a train in Italy, apparently because they didn't have the proper tickets to go into Switzerland.
No. I talked to both Watanabe and Yamaguchi several times.
Okay.
Watanabe is former vice president of Merrill Lynch.
Yes.
In Japan, and Yamaguchi is linked to the imperial family, and so is Watanabe for that matter.
Okay.
Watanabe wanted to use the bonds to finance a tunnel connecting South Korea and Japan. And Yamaguchi's case is a bit more complicated. They've been using an alias, Yamaguchi, to try to cash some of the instruments that really belong to the Dragon family for quite a few years. Nakasone had several fake Yamaguchis he was using to do this. This is the only real one. He's been, hiding and running and trying to save his life for a very long time. But the bonds that Yamaguchi was carrying were part of a batch that Dick Cheney, CIA, went to a Yakuza, a Japanese gangster's place, and he looked at these bonds and said, these are real, and he took some. And the gangster said, hey, if Dick Cheney says they're real, then hell, I'll try to cash some too. And that was the origin of the ones that Yamaguchi was carrying. But, I've been doing a lot of research and trying to figure out what is going on. And never mind the lawsuit. What I've come up with is the series of treaties that control the international financial system, the dollar-based system.
Yes.
And that's where you understand that there's a real history that, in 1944 there was an international agreement called the Bretton Woods Accord.
Yes. That's
well known. And Britain, France, and the U.S. got control of the global financial system after World War II as victors of the war, given to them by the Rothschild, I would assume. And but they didn't keep their promise of a Marshall Plan to develop the planet. They only did it for countries they controlled, i.e. Europe and Japan.
Right.
So the other groups, the non-aligned nations and other people, and also they started this fake Cold War to keep the military industry going. So they got together in 1955 and they came up with an agreement called the Hilton Green Memorial. It's an international accord. 167 countries signed it. And they took 85% of the world's treasure, gold and jewels and stuff, that these nations controlled. The other 15% is the G5 Rothschild mafias, okay? Basically, most of it.
Okay.
And they said, well, we're going to use this money to develop Africa and Asia. And President Kennedy agreed to use some of their gold to put out treasury dollars controlled by the U.S. government and not by the Fed, and do that. And, of course, Kennedy was assassinated, and the signatory for all this money was President Sukarno of Indonesia.
Yeah.
They killed like 500,000 people in Indonesia, and they finally overthrew Sukarno.
Right.
And since then, basically, they've been forging the rights to use this money, to access this money, and that's what's been financing the IMF and the World Bank and all these giant institutions like the UN. So, in other words, they don't have a legitimate right control the financial system. That's what the lawsuit uncovered.
Take a breath, Benjamin. This is Sean David Morton. You're on Strange Universe, and we'll be back. Benjamin, give me your take on 2012. Fantastic, amazing things are happening. Yeah. Massive solar eclipse, a Venus transit. What does 2012 look like for you? How does it? And you have a fantastic background in economics, and I'm sure.
First of all, let's talk. Okay, I think of me as like a skeptical native chief. All right.
Okay.
And the Jesuits have come and said, if you don't obey us, we're going to cause the sun to disappear. You know.
All right.
And the time comes and the sun disappears, and you say, hey, you know, we've seen these things before, you know. But these guys were able to predict it, so why don't we let them stay here and teach us, but we're not going to obey them. And the same way, when I went to visit the P2 Lodge and the Freemasons up there in Italy in the Vatican, and they said that they made long-term plans of social engineering based on the movements of the stars. Okay? And a lot of incredible, solar coincidences and stuff have been happening. Like we had the blue full moon in the blue moon on December 31st in the west, but it was on blue moon on January 1st in the east in 2009. We had the lunar eclipse on the winter solstice in 2010. Full moon with a lunar eclipse and a winter solstice, a lot of stuff like that. And according to them, that something would come from the east that would change the rule, that their 26,000-year plan, based on the wobble of the planet through the skies, the cycle that the Mayans also recorded, was coming to an end in 2012. They didn't know what would happen then. Okay? Now, that's the cosmic view of it. So there may have been some very long-term, sophisticated social engineering going on at work, and there is evidence for it, and to back up what these people have told me. Now that is something to keep in mind. It doesn't mean that we want to just go along with somebody in engineering our society, but it's a distinct possibility that these Illuminati or whatever did have a long-term plan. But leaving that aside, let's look at what's happening in the actual visible world that we can see with and measure. And what you see there is the mathematical certainty that the financial system in the West will collapse as it is. Or they'll have to reboot it, maybe is a better way of putting it. Even if you look, basically what's happened is that they don't have enough reality to back their money. Okay? The amount of physical industry, the trade surpluses, the actual stuff that has bills, that has stuff was put in boxes and sent, and you got a receipt. Okay? That's controlled by mainly Japan, China, and Russia, and some of the oil exporting countries. They now control the real stuff that's physical, that exists in reality. And what they have over in the U.S. and in Europe is a printing press without enough physical economy to back it, and lots of propaganda and lots of goons with guns. And it's a very volatile situation. The people with the guns are saying, hey, we're not going to let you just kind of rule us and run us into the ground. If necessary, we'll start a war. And so some kind of, what our group is proposing is that we have a 50-50 split with control of the planet between East and West. And not a single control center. No world government controlled in a single capital somewhere. But, certain, we all live in the same planet, we share the same air, certain rules that we all share. Like, we use international courts instead of war. And anyway, what I want to happen, what I'm proposing, is we have a really big campaign to end poverty and stop environmental destruction. That could be done within a few months if the will was there. And after that, we have a huge party, including a fake end of the world, okay? you could do stuff that really kind of would freak people out. For example, you could show realistic computer graphics of New York sinking to the ocean. Then you could cut off all communications to New York. And people in New York could be watching Tokyo sinking to the ocean. And then they've got, they make bring out all the UFOs they've been building for their fake alien invasion. And we know they've been building them, and they were planning a fake alien invasion. All right, bring it out. Let's have a party. Then my suggestion is that since we do have a calendar that's out of whack with the actual solar system, that we actually take the opportunity to end the world on December 21st, 2012. And for 3 days, there will be no world. Of course, there will be a world, but, everything will stop. And then December, the beginning of the new solar year, December 25th, 2012, could be January 1st, the year zero. And that would be a symbolic way of saying, okay, we're going to, fix our planet. We're going to fix the way we run it. We're going to make it more sane. We're going to have a better, healthier planet. And maybe, just maybe, if we get our act together, then the quarantine that we're obviously under will end. Because something is preventing us from going out in the universe, that's for sure. We were supposed to, I grew up reading science fiction, and we were supposed to have colonies on Mars and, all over the place by now. And instead, everything stopped in the 1970s.
Yeah, and flying cars. What happened to our flying cars?
Yeah, something happened. And what I understand that happened is that these gangsters with their nightmare vision of the future had an alternative future that they wanted to create. They wanted to create a future. These guys, remember, they're into eugenics. They wanted to turn themselves into gods and have the rest of us be their slaves. And they wanted to reduce the population to have more natural environment for them to enjoy. So it was like an eco-friendly fascist dictatorship ruled by inbred members of the same tribe who put themselves up as gods above us people. And they are the people who ruined the potential of Western civilization. They're the people who deliberately caused the collapse of the Soviet Union, and now they cause the collapse of the United States economy. That was an engineered. Your crisis, your economic financial collapse was engineered by members of these royal families.
Right.
They wanted to cause everything to plunge in price, and then they were going to go and buy everything up at 2 cents to the dollar. They've been stopped. Their plan for a fascist world government is going to be stopped. That's the big theme for 2012. And since they're not planning to go quietly into the night, I think what you're going to watch is a lot of hardship still in the United States and Europe for the first part of the year. And I've also been contacted by a group that claims that they were behind the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, and the American Revolution. And they're saying that they're going to be fomenting revolution next summer in Europe and the U.S. when it's warm and you can have giant demonstrations, and they're betting that the police and the military will not shoot the demonstrators, but instead they'll side with them. The problem with a mob-based revolution, of course, is that there's a lot of suffering and chaos and anarchy and a breakdown of systems that accompanies it. What we're really hoping is that the people and the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually would live up to their oaths to uphold the U.S. Constitution against enemies, foreign and domestic. Because clearly, your government is not democratic anymore. It's a fascist dictatorship. It's run by, now the politicians in Washington that we've now found out, almost all of them have these huge bribe accounts in the Vatican Bank. If you've been bribed by a foreign agency, you're disqualified from office, okay? There's a legal reason to arrest them. There's a perfectly legal for the U.S. military to go in and arrest most of the members of Congress and the Senate. And, of course, the Obama regime. which is run by a foreign-born, CIA-raised mystery man, who obviously has a lot more money than he can account for through his government salary.
Yeah.
It's so corrupt, and it wouldn't take much. All they'd have to do is send a few armed men into the TV stations and the newspaper headquarters, or even better, just make a phone call to the 5 heads of the big media conglomerates and tell them that it's it. Their goose is cooked, and they have to start telling the truth. And arrest a few of these old men. Put them in jail. And then they say, well, how are we going to be able to meet our payrolls? Well, you just go into the 12 Federal Reserve Board banks. You send troops in there. You talk to the technicians who manufacture the numbers on computers you call dollars and say, we're in charge now.
There's the tunes. Do you have to go, Benjamin, or can you stick around for a little while longer?
No, I think we'll leave it at that. I do have stuff to do. But anyway, you can make yourself free in 2012. We can do all this. We just have to make the collective decision.
Fantastic. Benjamin Fulford, my friend, my hero. God bless you, Benjamin. Thank you so much. Domo arigato.
Domo.
Thank you. This is Sean Morton on